And good afternoon in London. We're joined today by Robert Dellner, our good friend. We've been working together for a few years now on ideas like integral finance and integral economics, which Robert will delve into. But this is our, our fifth show now, or fifth show of What Now? And we've been busy this last few days producing these, I think, wonderful dialogues that we hope are inspiring people to feel hopeful in spite of the pandemic that we're in. And so these are conversations about a new way of thinking, a new story, and we are really blessed to have Robert with us today. Over to you, Nika.
Hi, welcome, Robert. Welcome, Mark, as well. So Robert and I have been working together for a few years as well. And I'll let Robert talk for himself, but I'm going to start him off with a question. And normally this is what I do, that just to stitch together what has gone before. So our yesterday's guest was talking about out of nothingness comes totality, which is integrality as well. And this is the domain that Robert and I work in as well. So the question is that with our human consciousness now reaching that integral level where we can see the totality of our reality, so how do you then place this or frame it in, say, for example, impact investment, where we know that now it's not just about finance and economics, we have to look after our spiritual side, the ecological side, environment. So it's all integral, you know, the totality of everything. So over to you, Robert.
Thank you, Anika, and thank you, Mark, for having me today. Well, obviously, we live in some interesting times right now, and impact investments kind of emerged out of the sustainability movement into ESG, which 10, 15 years ago kind of morphed into what is now called impact investments. I think it's worth just highlighting that from an integral perspective, what we have decided in terms of defining what impact investments actually is that it's the totality of the deployment of capital in any kind of context. So we've tried to move away from this idea that impact investments is intentionally or only thematically structured and towards some sort of positive direct impact, whether it's a sustainability or whether it's an environmental or a social relational sphere. So it's more about understanding that once you start connecting the pieces into a whole, then that actual investments create this four worlds, as we would call it, footprint, wherever it goes. And that also then changes the way you might look at the deployment of capital from, for example, philanthropy versus private equity, private debt, etc. So these the borders start to merge and synthesize a little bit more. And you mentioned consciousness before. That's obviously the big theme in and around impact investments. And obviously we live in these times right now where we are, at least here in the UK, we're in a lockdown situation. And even though, of course, we know the only constant is change, but how do we navigate the current crisis with meaningful change and uncertainty? We talk a lot about living in a VUCA world, lots of uncertainty, ambiguity, etc. But how do we actually now manage this particular period? And what can we actually do as individuals, for ourselves and also for our organizations, to not only prepare ourselves for the future, but also actually start planning and creating strategies in and around what are we going to be and become once this pandemic is actually over. So that to me now is pretty much where I would like to kind of frame the impact We could obviously talk about impact in general terms, but I think it's an opportunity right now where we are, within this context of the corona crisis, to look further inside and really try and calibrate for ourselves, who we are as individuals, who we want to become, and also what kind of changes we would like to institutionalize within our organizations as and when this crisis is over. And I think that's probably where I think impact investments needs to look right now, is more inwards. So you said that reality is what it is, but also each individual's reality is what it is. We're all very confident that we are aware of reality. But there are, of course, ways and approaches that you can take as an individual to expand your vision and expand your way that you see your reality. And one of the best ways, as always, is of course through experience, whether it's a positive experience or a negative experience. These all have a tendency to kind of broaden our horizons. And I would like to sort of just put out there that obviously this particular situation, as difficult as it is for many people, we have this opportunity really to look inside as well for ourselves and for our organizations.
Robert, you've
known each other for quite a while. We met in London, imagining a new even banking architecture. We've talked about this integral model about well-being, economics, and finance. What would you say is the opportunity right now? It feels like this is the perfect window to bring forward some of these ideas. When the market has corrected, is down on its luck, we have probably trillions of dollars sitting on the sidelines. We say it's a market correction, but that's just money sitting on the sidelines right now. And we have a interesting scenario where I think Spain just announced, universal basic income, as if like money is now a public utility, it's free. And what were we worried about, even 3 months ago, when suddenly governments can just create money and put it in your bank account without even, with a click of a mouse key. What do you think is the financial architecture going forward going to look like, or might look like in your kind of, give us a picture, a narrative based on what you've been studying and your work in the banking, in the financial world and risk. What do you see as emerging?
Well, at the moment, we sort of almost have to suspend the sort of conventional model of finance and economics, because as we've seen, the government interventions across the globe has been such scale that it's difficult to really understand what the implications are and what the repercussions would be further down the line. Because we're adding debt to debt, we're increasing the money supply exponentially in some areas. So I don't really want to, I think, necessarily try and predict how this is going to kind of create a structural shift. I think for now, we're going to go down this path, that this is possible and this is going to be sustainable, and the increased government interventions will be manageable going forward. I think it's very difficult to try and sort of emulate where this could go in terms of its various alternatives. But what I do think we individually and also organizationally to reflect on is, our role and our responsibility in and around this. So as I said, we live, in a VUCA world, but the other acronym I've sort of come up with recently is what I call FARN: fearful, anxious, regressive, and nebulous. This is kind of equally, as individual, we're always at risk going back to a more regressive, a more anxious, a more fearful, and a more nebulous way of looking at how we navigate the current territory that we're in. And a lot of that will require a form of inner working and a form of looking more inside and finding maybe in these circumstances that we actually have created a new self as well, through this particular crisis that we're actually going through right now. So what that means for us, of course, then we can turn into it inside out and an outside in. So currently, I believe we should be working more about the outside in. We're in the situation. We can defend, and this is the 4Ds for those who are interested in acronyms. So we can defend, deny, diminish, and deflect what is going on in the world right now. But equally, we got to turn this around, find the silver lining, see how we can have a positive effect going forward for ourselves and for our families and organizations and teams and wherever our context is.
Thank you so much, Robert, because this was a good analysis, and I see you're coming in as a psychotherapist or psychologist now. So what you are saying, I know it's very practical what you've just said, that there could be a regression as well. So, we could be going back to a very anxious and fearful way and become like even more, I don't want to say evil, but the other way. So rather than a new world emerging, it could be worse than what we have actually imagined. So people could now be feeling a bit, inadequate because they are going to lose a lot of money, their jobs, positions. So what do you say to this? As in, do you think this could also happen? And how do we, how can we prevent this, say, for example, as a practical advice?
I think it comes down to individual responsibility, how you actually respond to this. We're already seeing in some areas in the world that people are regressing. I mean, human beings, we have this shadow of ourselves. We have a very good part of ourselves, of course, but when we become fearful, when that gets stretched too far, we become anxious, we do tend to regress. And we try to protect the self and the other and the family. So essentially, we see some of that going on right now, hoarding. I was talking to someone in Italy yesterday, there's looting going on in southern Italy, etc. And in America now, of course, there is a spike in sales of weapons. So we see this potential risk coming in to our societies and our communities. Again, I don't think, I'm eternally optimistic when it comes to matters such as these. I believe that we will find our higher being. This is a real opportunity for us to take the next step in our evolution as a human species. And to connect that to impact investments, of course, it means becoming more aware, more conscious, more connected to the footprints that we actually create socially, environmentally, financially, economically, culturally, and spiritually through what we call, as you know, the moral core. So this is kind of where I think we need to take responsibility individually and look in the mirror. What is the false self that is coming out in these circumstances? What is the ego playing up for me? And what is it really what I want to bring forth when this pandemic actually kind of ceases and I come back into the world again as a new human, as a different human, and strategically have thought about the kind of changes I would want to make to myself and to the others and to my organization. And I see this period now as a real opportunity to do so.
So Robert, you and Anika, and well, the three of us, and certainly you and Anika have delved into this model, this kind of way of seeing the world. Let's call it an illumination of your own consciousness or conscience by moving through your own four-world view of things, which is very consistent with the indigenous medicine wheel. So the mental, physical, spiritual, emotional well-being. And we've talked about with previous guests about, unity, circle, that each of us, in a sense, has to do this work. The medicine wheel, I say, like spiral dynamics, moves clockwise through time, driven by your own volition, free will. It's like a wheel. And can you help us think through how these four worlds, like, and you've explained it very simply to me in terms of that we're making a choice to travel through those four dimensions. So individually, we have this pause, this illumination of conscience, let's say, but also collectively. And what does this process hope to teach us? Do you feel?
Yeah, thank you, Mark. I think all teachings is about looking into our own, let's say, what we can call the false self or the false ego, and try to substitute it with something which comes from our very deep inner moral core in combination with new knowledge and co-creative relationships. So that is what I think is actually, the opportunity for a better word, but that is what I think each of us could be challenged towards, is to find that line, that journey for the inner truth, the inner self, to actually come out and play more in the real world as we enter it in the months to come. And this is about co-creation. So as for those who don't know, but in the South, which we call the four worlds, the integral four worlds, based on the navigational coordinates we have in the South, this is our being. So we ground ourselves in the being, because this is kind of where we take root within community and relationship. We then move into becoming. This is where we have our co-creative context of understanding who we are in relationship then to this inner self and to the other, moving into the co-creative, the pure co-creative space where we share knowledge within our community, within our ecosystems, to then become a contribution. We call this the 4 C's. So that's our inner call within our being, and our context within our becoming, and our co-creation within our understanding, our knowledge creation, and then our contribution within the doing of things. And then we circle back around again to being. So it's being, becoming, knowing, and doing. Call, context, co-creation, and contribution. And these is the sort of the circular way that we expand our consciousness, our awareness, and our understanding of who we are and to whom we belong, and who we want to be in the world. And now, as I said, I think it's an opportunity to look at how we can make a contribution post-pandemic, in a way, take this opportunity to kind of renew ourselves, to recreate ourselves and our inner self, so that when we come into the outside again, we have the opportunity to make a real contribution, as you will define it yourselves.
Thank you, Robert. This was very nice and in line with my thoughts as well. So can we then, I'm going to ask you something which I know you will understand. We are talking about integral consciousness, and also the, now the evolution of our consciousness. So we are on that tangent now. Where do you think that this is an emergent sort of call, that we were heading towards that way? And now the call, it has emerged from, the universal call as well. As you know, I talk about this stuff. I had to bring it in, sorry, Mark. So I feel this was the universal call, and it was, the calling is this now. So the context we already have, the historical context. So you're now saying that we have to co-create, and that it's not the new world. I mean, we can't dare say we are creating a new world, but yes, we are creating a new narrative now together, co-creating this narrative, which needs all of us to participate as active participants in this now new world, or imagining a new world, maybe.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. I would also sort of just caution the idea we're entering a new world. I mean, in a sense that we've been entering an integral age for the last 15, 20 years. Glacially, slowly, we're emerging into something which is more interconnected, more aware of wholeness, more integral, again, for a better word. But because everything starts with self, and everything starts with the self and the mirror, which then can become a reflection on something else. You know, I come back to this where we are right now in this context of being in a pandemic. And one of the areas, for example, where I think co-creatively we can all contribute to or towards is the way we govern not only ourselves, our households, but also, of course, our organizations, and really start to think carefully about how I govern and how we govern ourselves as organizations is, of course, a reflection of me, and it's as if I'm the leader. Right? And for me, as a psychologist, the first thing I would kind of ask is what power complexes. So what power is actually being used within the governance system to make decisions and organize and manage things within this organizations, and what by using these power complexes is not being allowed to enter in. And that very simple, let's say, analogy would be sufficient, I think, for people to just think about when you meet your colleagues again in the office spaces. I know it's all virtual now, but if we meet our colleagues again in the office spaces, how would you want to redesign or rethink, re-evolve and re-emerge and co-create a governing space which actually optimizes the collective intelligence, the collective consciousness of all these people that you have around you? Because now, of course, the big impulse to the pandemic, of course, is things like compassion. People have become and are found their own, let's say, maybe greater level of compassion and understanding. You know, it's more contemplation, there's more looking inwards and seeing what can I do for the other in terms of what is happening right now within this context. But bring that forth, bring that then with you into where we are going to emerge into post-pandemic in the months to come. And I think that is to me the sort of, again, it's not a silver lining, but it is one of the opportunities we have as individuals. Take responsibility for the self. How would I want to see my own governance evolve into, if I were to look at this very deeply now, very carefully, to try and integrate the various parts of the self and bring more of the other stakeholders into the way I actually manage my business with a little bit more compassion and, dare I say it, love and consideration for people.
So building on that, beautiful, you used my favorite word, love, Robert. I'm feeling that this is exactly what's happening amongst certainly my little men's book club. We're reading The Art of Living, written under when the Emperor Nero was in power in Rome, when, of course, lots of slaughtering was going on. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a feeling of compassion for those who are struggling with. My friend last night said, it feels weird to have $2,000 just plunked into your bank account. And I did nothing. The government just, a click of a mouse and I have presto, I have $2,000. But it feels kind of inadequate. And that feeling of, you know, compassion, and he was saying, well, what can we do for each other? And I said, well, something I love to do is talk about financial literacy or financial emotion. Mm-hmm. I know I can help people. A lot of people are terrible at money management. They don't even know where money comes from. But here we have this awakening and awareness of money, the fragility, the basis of our basic needs. I mean, what do we need? We need groceries, maybe honey, good honey, and water and shelter and children and loved ones. And so when we go back And the other thing I was going to ask you as a psychologist is, and a Jungian scholar too, I think, is some say that after 60 days, the human brain actually, we're going to get rewired. The new normal won't be what it was in December. And I think this is exciting, where this notion of loving each other in practice, one of my friends said love is an action. It's a choice. It's a verb.
Could I quickly add, and then we'll let Robert finish off what was really mind-blowing for me as well, that I think this is what the rupture is in our human consciousness as well. And as Rumi said, the opening, where the opening is, the light will enter there. So maybe it is for us together, this is the time that this is the rupture in our consciousness. So when we go back to normal, we have to now think, what is that normal? And thank you so much for your time today, Robert. This was very enlightening, and I'll let you take on from here.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think, if you look at where we are in this situation, one of the ways we find ourselves is, of course, when our context, our world strips away that which is false, whether by force, sometimes through whether it's illness or bad circumstances, or as in the current situation. So even if you have enormous wealth at the moment, you can't really enjoy it. You can't go to your favorite restaurant. You can't, do your favorite weekend trip, etc., etc. But that actually brings back the real self. So it's a little death of the big ego, little small deaths along the way. And as the ego kind of dies, it finds itself, it realizes it actually survives this particular situation, and it reemerges as a much bigger self and a much more grounded and rooted self in reality. We come back to the reality again of who we are as individuals and who we are in relation to other people. And as you say, Mark, clearly for many people right now, it's an opportunity to expand on the relational self. Who are we in context with other people, in relation with other people? And are we the best person we can be? Or have we been maybe looking after our own interests maybe a little bit too much in the past? Do we want to sort of dial that down a little bit and maybe make a few changes, etc.? So I totally agree with you that for each individual of us, we need to look at, who we are in this mirror, and who we are in the relationship to the other, and how we build, truthful, real, sustainable relationships. So just coming back to integral impact investments again, for me, one of the ways we can do that, one of the vehicles that we travel on, is actually money. And in my opinion, money is almost a primordial relationship. What I mean with that is that primordial relationships are mother, father, and your closest siblings, etc. These are relationships that it doesn't really matter what they do or what they say. We love them dearly, fundamentally, in the root of our very being. Right? And money, funny enough, has almost a similar effect of who we are and also who we become. Because very early on in life, we need to build a relationship with money. We are giving values and beliefs about what money is, what it does for us, how it makes us bigger, and maybe how it makes us become something more. And again, this is an opportunity to actually live for a period of time, a little bit what you said, Mark, with, frugally, with the necessities, go back to a more basic level, so Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and really look at, do we really need all the other things?
Yes.
And there I totally agree that we will see ourselves maybe emerging in the future, wanting, needing less of the things we thought we wanted and needed before. And that is potentially quite a big shift also for our economy in terms of how we operate, the consumer economy, etc. And that could be quite a significant, I think, fundamentally a positive shift. But our relationship, make no mistake, our relationship with money is so fundamental. It's probably the single biggest impact on all our other relationships combined, because it's core to us, who we are, who we believe, whether we need more of it, whether we think we can do without, whether we give it away, whether we collect it, amass it, how we spend it, etc. So this is what I mean when it's an opportunity to look in the mirror, and money is a mirror. Who you are, who you think you are, who you're becoming, what you're doing in your career, what you are willing to do and endure and support in the pursuit of money.
Thank you, Robert. That is fabulous. I mean, as a student of money for my whole life, I think you've summarized it beautifully. I never thought as primordial. I would consider money should be a common good, a utility, just like power and light and water. And we know the story of money. You and I know the story of money, and Nika knows the story of money. That's maybe for another podcast or broadcast. But to me, what's fascinating is you just said something which is exciting for me as an economist, which is, up till December, everyone was chasing returns on the markets. GDP has to keep going up, and no one ever stopped to say, why do I have to consume more? Why am I motivated to want more when I have enough? Do I distinguish between needs and wants? And here we are self-isolating. It becomes very clear what you need. You need toilet paper. You don't have to hoard it. Hopefully there'll be a steady supply of trees, which there are lots of trees. So that's not a problem. But here we have an economy that actually could contract to a much lower level of consumption, a much lower level of trade, a much lower GDP, where you said another important word, recreation. Where do we find joy when we go on holidays? Mostly in nature, where we recreate ourselves. So we have these beautiful windows now to reflect on. Does the economy really need to grow the way it had? Why is it growing? My point is it's growing right now in relation to debt, and that's a whole other matter. And then there's these complexities of the accounting system, which one of our next guests tomorrow, Ronnie Lessem, hopefully will talk about, because these are fascinating constructs that are 500 years old, have become part of the wallpaper that we have forgotten its origins and its great mysterious teachings and fundamentals. But so that's what gets me thinking and excited about a new economic order that's based on those basic primary needs, and then maybe we don't have to go shopping as much and fill ourselves up with material goods.
So filling in from the impact perspective is, of course, that we go from, as we know, as human beings, we love quantitative forms of measurements, and it's easy to understand, it's linear, it's rational, something that we in the Western world easily can absorb, etc. So a lot of what we're talking about now is actually changing the way we value capital, and also what actual value capital contributes. So from an impact perspective, in my world, or within the four worlds, we now derive returns from each one of these four worlds. So we're not substituting financial return, we're complementing financial return with impact returns in the environment, in the relational social field, in the cultural field. Culture is very often forgotten in this, by the way, in the knowledge creating realm, and of course finance and economics itself. How do they then synthesize? How do they actually help navigate each other so that we actually get a composite return? So you have to now start to think in world terms that it's unsustainable to have financial returns which are double or triple above the GDP growth. So the economic, let's say, contributing driver within the financial return. We now have to start to complement that financial return with seeing value. How do you see value? You go deeper. You go into what is valuable to you. So it's again, comes into you as an individual. What can you see? What can you touch and feel within these four worlds, which you consider valuable? We just talked about relationship, but how are they actually played out on the field of, let's say, the organizational structure that you're trying to create? So again, start with yourself, start with governance. How does the relational field play out within your own organization? So create the mirror where it's closest to you and to your team or loved ones, and start from there. Then you can build further out into the other realms. But the composite, the whole, the integrative forms of return is kind of where we need to go as an economy and as a society, to understand that financial return is not the only thing that we will be looking for if we're going to make it as a human species.
So, Robert, are you then suggesting that this jolt would have an impact on the investors as well? Or would it have like a reverse impact? It could be that.
How can it not be? How can it not have an immense impact on them? The impact investment impulse that started 15, 20 years ago is already in situ. It's already moving. It's a wave that has already begun and is accelerating. I think what's happening right now in the world, it will actually speed the acceleration up. And we will see more integrative forms of understanding what impact actually is, more advanced ways of measuring and accounting for well-being, for culture, for other capitals within our system that are contributing to our totality as a human species. And that's the challenge, but that's the opportunity, that's the exciting bit. But it always starts with self and working on your own awareness in and around these type of fields.
Robert, I just want to thank you too. As you're speaking, I'm thinking about, you know, that amazing woman author Ayn Rand, who influenced many economists in the United States, Alan Greenspan, Milton Friedman, who I believe, if I paraphrase, didn't believe in altruism, didn't think that we were, even though she wrote amazing things about love, human love, which were fascinating. But I think what we're seeing is maybe an emergence of this human, you know, these self-evident truths that we are hardwired for compassion, for relationship. Maybe that's what this pandemic or pause is causing us to reflect on, that we're all one in being. We're all interconnected. I'm not separated from my sister in Botswana or Seoul. It's this beautiful acknowledgement that we're in this together. When we sing together, when we are in harmony, as nature teaches us, then we find joy. We find, we may reject Ayn Rand ultimately. Maybe she was just an angry woman who was mad because her parents lost their property in Russia, but it doesn't matter now.
The small ego again.
Thank you, Robert.
And
thank you so much.
You know, but you're right, Annika, that there will be people who will stay within the regressionary field, and they will actually, if anything, come out of this trying to recuperate and you know, regain what they had lost economically in this period. But then there will be others who will take sort of the path that we maybe have discussed here. And you know, we will see in the months and years to come what effect this has actually had on us as an economy and as a human species. And that's why it's not worth predicting. It's maybe interesting intellectually or academically, but what's really important right now is just to stay here in the now with yourself and think and explore and try and navigate the various areas where you as an individual can actually contribute to and towards going forward, coming from the self. That's the real opportunity. That's the real challenge, I think.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Robert. I just want to compliment Annika, because right now she looks like Oprah. And the light streaming on her face. I mean, it's just pure joy.
Yeah, it was a beautiful note to end this conversation with, Robert. This was a very positive note.
Wonderful.
Stay well.
You too. Stay well, stay safe, and thank you very much for having me.